The numbers are in on this week's episode of the Producer Podcast. As projects grow, the size of the support staff and the budgets also grow. And with that comes the need for an accounting department. So on today's episode of the Producer Podcast, I'm sitting down with production accountant Margot Ransom from Production Company Accountants to talk about what they do and how their job works hand in hand with the producer. So without further ado, let's get started. Thank you, Margot, for taking the time to come on to the Producer Podcast today.
Well, thank you, Micah. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I got to start by just kind of hearing a little bit of your story because I go to film festivals, I meet with up and coming filmmakers. Nobody's ever talking about, I want to be a film accountant. So how did you wind up working in this part of the industry?
Well, when I was growing up, I love movies and I would watch the credits, be like, how can I work on movies? And then I actually knew a couple of accountants that were film accountants and they would travel all over the world. So I envisioned myself, on James Bond sets and all that other stuff. So I would watch the credits at the end of a movie and it'd be like, actor, no, I'm not really interested in that. Director, no, not really interested. Accountant, I can do that, because I had that's the way my brain works. So fast forward, I spent my whole entire adult career in reality TV because God has a sense of humor. But in the last couple of years, I have just pivoted to film. And here I am. And it's now that everything's remote, I'm not traveling to James Bond locations or whatnot. But, um, we make it work. And I still have some reality TV clients. So it's all good.
Nice. So, like, where did you go to get your training and some of that? Because so many
Yeah.
people I talk to, they're like, well, film schools don't teach film accounting, and normal accounting college degrees don't teach film accounting. So, how did you get in and learn this?
Well, I was very determined to get into entertainment. So I got like an entry-level job at a TV production company right at the ground level and helped them grow. And I am not a CPA. I didn't go to college for accounting. I have books. I have a brother who's a CPA, so and mentors. And I am basically self-taught. But at this company that I started my career at, I just learned everything that I could about production accounting. And I treat production accounting like regular accounting. When people say it's not the same, I beg to differ with that because film is a business, TV is a business, and each industry has its own idiosyncrasies. The chart of accounts at a dental office is going to be very different than chart of accounts on a movie, the budget line item.
Hmm.
Right? But at the end of the day, you want a profit and you want everything segregated out. Um, so in my head and in my practice and in my world, and I'm on kind of a mission to change this paradigm that it's two separate things, production accounting and regular accounting, because
Okay.
we force film and TV accounting into a generally accepted accounting principles. That's GAAP for short. I don't know what your listeners know, but we do production accounting according to GAAP standards so that, we use QuickBooks Online. We have software that overlays it to produce the industry standard cost reports that producers need to see if are they on budget or not on budget. But the tax account get in there and understand what's going on. Um, and that's just how we do it. How I got into it is I think that lack of a lack of formal accounting education just allowed me to not accept all the existing paradigms that to a large degree don't really fit in film, but everybody just accepts that's the way it's always been done. So I'm out there smashing paradigms and I'm kind of doing it my way and it's worked.
Hmm.
But
Nice.
we're doing it according to generally accepted accounting principles. So when you ask how I taught myself, I'm basically self-taught.
That's cool. So I'm pretty much a self-taught producer. It's all been doing it with other people or on my own and learning that way. So never went to film school.
Experience is the best teacher.
Definitely. So then I think a fun place to start would be to have you just expand more on what all does an accounting department handle? Because for me, I grew up like, total indie world where it's like the producer does all the accounting stuff. And then I finally got on to a couple of projects where they had an accounting department and was like, wait, you mean the producer doesn't have to do this and do
Right,
that
right.
and everything?
Right. Okay, so if you've done that, you have a little bit of taste of it. But what the accounting department does is they're going to be the liaison with the payroll company because entertainment payroll is its own beast.
Hmm.
It doesn't really fit into an ADP or a paychecks model because of various things. First of all, there are unions, that reporting has to be handled, and so there's these specialty entertainment. There's a handful of them in Hollywood. I'm not going to name names, but you want to work with a specialty payroll company. In addition to the unions, often deals in production are made, for example, on a day rate. Like for a cameraman, we'll pay you X dollars for a 12-hour day. And they agree to that. And so there's a deal memo struck that way. But within that X amount, I'm just going to call it $500, whatever it is, for a 12-hour day, the payroll company has to back into the statutory requirements, like there has to be overtime in there and all, and every state's different. So, I mean, these things can get very complex, and you want a professional payroll company to handle your payroll on a production. But the production accountant, part of what they do is that liaison to make sure that the start paperwork is submitted and that, the edits that come back from the payroll company are correct and they comport to the time cards. And in these days, a lot of what an accountants do is also tech. It's making sure that this tech is talking to that tech. As I mentioned, we use QuickBooks Online, so we have to get the raw data from the payroll company and ingest it into QuickBooks Online, so it's going to show up in these cost reports that we produce. So that's payroll, and then the accountants, of course, pay the bills. They make sure that everything's coded into the proper line. That editing's going to editing and equipment rental to equipment rental, et cetera, et cetera. And every film is different, but there are similarities. But sometimes the accountant is responsible for managing the cash and moving it around. Sometimes the owner of the project wants to do that, so there's cash
Hmm.
management. If they're using some kind of prepaid P cards, for example, cachet, they will make sure that that card stays funded and make sure that those transactions are properly coded so they get in the right line in the budget too, so that the line producer can manage the budget and know what the costs are in real time. That's what we do in our company. And then, so there's three sources of costs for any production. There's payroll, which I spoke about in accounts payable. You want a system that it syncs into the whatever tech stack you're using. I've seen producers, especially on lower budget things, they're just going rogue, handwriting checks or that the accountant doesn't know about, or sending PayPals or Venmos that, they see them come through the bank and the
Hmm.
accountant doesn't know what they are. And because the accountant doesn't know what they are, they're not reflected in the cost report, which is problematic. So you want to make sure that your systems are all talking to each other.
Right.
And that's what the accountant does in a nutshell. The accountant makes sure that the line producer or the stakeholders in a project have the information they need to make nimble, confident, and profitable decisions. If you're over budget online, you need to know that yesterday so that you can make allowances somewhere else.
Hmm.
So that's what an accountant is responsible for. They're the reporting agent. They're not making decisions. They're not making creative decisions, but they're giving the creatives the data they need to make them. Like, you can't do that. You only have X dollars left on that line. I know you want to do it, but you can't do that,
Yes,
or whatever that looks like.
for sure. So then, and obviously every film set is different, but like when it comes to building out the accounting department in terms of like positions, what are like the common positions that you'll find in an accounting department?
Another great question. Well, if you go to the movies and you'll see I'm a credit watcher, you'll see all the people in the accounting department. There's often a controller. I mean, we're talking on these big budget films. There's a controller, there's a lead accountant, and then there's a payroll accountant, and then a first assistant and a second assistant and a clerk. And there might be 10, because I've counted 10 or 12, but most of the films that in our world they're not going to have accounting
Hmm.
staff for 10 to 12 people. So they have a lead accountant, maybe a clerk, maybe a payroll accountant. But so that's typically what you see. At my firm, though, the way we operate is a flat monthly fee, and you get basically everybody at our firm. We negotiate the rates kind of based on what we know might be budgeted for a 5 million or a 10 million or a $20 million film. That's
Right.
at our rates, but we again, here am I kind of bucking tradition. If you talk to a traditional production accountant, they're going to say, well, you need this, that, and the other thing. But the way we do it is a flat fee based on what we know the volume of work is going to be and these hyper efficient systems that we have in place.
Real quick, just since you mentioned it, take a moment just to tell a little bit more about your company. What's the name of it? And kind of
Right.
like how that came to be.
It's prodcoaccountants.com. And it's short for production company, obviously, but the name of the company is Prodco Accountants. And how it came to be is about 7 years ago, the reality production company that I was working at had lost a contract and it was shuttering its doors. And so I helped them liquidate all the assets and everything. But then I said to myself, self, I don't feel like looking for another job. And I'd always thought of doing this and starting my own company. So I said, now's the time. So and I was so good at what I did at the companies that I knew I needed a new challenge. So and I knew
Hmm.
I could do it for more than one person at a time. So I that's exactly what I did. Put up a website, hung out a shingle, and people started coming to me. I specialized originally in unscripted and reality and documentary production.
Okay.
I mentioned these last couple of years I've pivoted more to film.
Hmm.
So that's my story. And then as we grew, I brought on staff. Originally, it was just me, but then I grew my company. Now there are six of us.
Nice.
Yeah. And the sky's the limit, really.
Oh, yes, that's for sure. Everybody, it seems like your production accountants are the one area that people are always looking for help with. So then, looking kind of towards a film's development and pre-production stage, like at what point should producers be looking at getting their accounting company or accounting department set up and going for a project?
That's a great question. My short answer when I'm asked that is really when you're starting to spend money. But I recognize that especially in development, you might not have the money. But once you're in pre-pro, it looks like a go project.
Hmm.
You want to bring someone on as early as you can because you don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish, like that saying goes, saving money, but then you're spending all this money that's not allocated anywhere and nothing's set up or working. Somebody's just, like I mentioned before, they're Venmoing or PayPaling or writing checks to people. And then an accountant comes in, then there's a mess to clean up, right? So it's kind of a balancing act of when to bring somebody, certainly before you start hard production, certainly before you start shooting. But I would say as early in pre-pro I would budget for it as early as possible. Development, not so much because you could be in development for years. You're not.
Right.
But I mean, on the other hand, there are film production companies that have multiple projects in development at any given time. They're getting paid for these development deals. They might be in production on one or two. So, and they might have an accountant on staff, and we do that also. So when you ask when to bring someone on, if it's just in a vacuum for a particular project, I would say during pre-pro when they're starting to spend real money. But the
Hmm.
sooner the better.
And like in that pre-production phase, obviously, they're helping track anything that is getting spent, but are there other aspects that maybe the accounting department is helping the producer kind of get set up and figured out?
100%. Getting set up with the payroll company, getting your apps set up and all talking to each other, like I was speaking about earlier. Making sure that the chart of accounts is set up in the payroll company, in your systems, so that you can get rational cost reporting, because that's really the most important thing. If there's any banking that needs to be set up, cachet cards or whatever kind of P cards they're going to be using. Um, and that's about it, because once those things are set up, you're just off to the races and using them,
Hmm.
using the systems. It's some setup, and then yeah.
When it comes to a producer looking around for their accounting team, like what things should a producer be keeping in mind when trying to figure out is this company or is this,
Sure.
freelance accountant maybe the right fit for our project?
Yeah. Well, obviously, you want somebody experienced in production. I mean, I personally do background checks on anybody I hire. They're handling money. I think that's important. Referrals. I'm trying to think of what specifically a producer would look for when hiring an accountant versus anybody else. I think familiarity with the pace of our business. Okay, it's
Hmm.
not like doing the bookkeeping for a dry cleaners, that you can get in there once a week and do things. I mean, it's a fast-paced environment, so you want somebody okay with that. Yeah, I mean, that's what I've got, experience. And if it was me, I would run background checks if you don't know them personally.
Yeah.
And you obviously want the most cost-effective solution, but not at the expense of accuracy and reliable reporting.
A lot of areas of film where it's like, yeah, you want to save money, but at
Right,
some point saving money doesn't do you any good.
exactly. And what is that point? That's always the balancing act.
Hmm. Yeah. So then once the accounting team is kind of brought on the kind of that day-to-day basis, like how are they interacting with the producers? What information have you found either producers usually like to have daily or information that's helpful even if the producer's not asking for it to make sure he's getting?
That's a great question. Well, this software that we use that overlays QuickBooks Online, that produces the cost reports. And that's really the most important thing that a producer or a line producer or any stakeholder needs to look at. Are we on budget, right?
Hmm.
But in addition to that, on request, we provide a trial balance or a balance sheet to the producers, because there are some things that don't show on the cost report. For example, if you've sent in a deposit to the payroll company, that's not going to show on your cost report. It's just cash out the door, that's temporarily out the door, right? Or
Right.
if you have some kind of deposits with like a location rental or something like that, or the owner may have taken a draw. That is rarely happened, and it shouldn't happen. But if the project owner took some kind of personal draw out of it, that's going to show on the balance sheet or the trial balance. Either of those reports, they're kind of interchangeable. But so that's an important thing for any business owner, to keep a track on the pulse of his business. Like, the balance sheet will show you what your assets are, what your liabilities are, and what your equity is, right? We send our clients a weekly, we call it a green light report, and it's basically all of the approved bills, so that
Okay.
they know, and then we let them know how much money is in the bank. And then sometimes it's multiple bank accounts. So we'll say you have to pay this much out of this bank account, this much out of that bank account, so that if they need to move money around, that can happen. And also that balance sheet will tell you what your total is for accounts payable. It will show you what your receivables are if there's outstanding invoices that the network or whoever is funding this thing owes to the production. So it will show you your receivables and your payables. I mean, most of our clients are not asking for this information, but that they can access it at any given time. We kind of educate our clients on how to read these reports,
Right.
what exactly they need. Here's a critical one that you haven't asked about, but at the beginning of every production, you want to you're going to have a budget, of course, but you want to do out a cash flow so that you'll know
Hmm.
when you're going to hit those peaks or valleys, or when you may need to get some deficit financing in, or whatever that looks like, just to make sure that you're going to cover the production during the course of it. So that's an important one. Typically it's not, you do one up at the beginning of the production so that you can demonstrate to all the concerned parties how the cash is going to flow. So that's not something that's updated weekly or monthly necessarily.
Okay.
It's just an important one to have in the beginning so that you can know. And the way that's done, you didn't ask me this, but I'm just going to tell you that
Oh, sure. Yeah.
briefly is, you have your budget with your whatever 50 or 100 line items. And then for each line items, it's like, okay, well, these editors we're not going to use till week blah, 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 but these shooters we're going to use in this week. So just go line by line and then week by week in an Excel spreadsheet and you map out when you're going to be spending the money. And that helps the funders know when they need to fund these
Hmm.
different milestones or however the deal is structured.
I definitely have not made one of those before. I've heard about cash flows, but yeah, that's one I have not
Well,
made
you can
myself.
make a movie without one, but it's
Hmm.
it's helpful to have, and it's a good discipline, especially if there are investors and that want to know when they need to fund you. So, I mean, if you're doing
Definitely.
a micro budget, maybe you don't need it, but I just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, no, that was good. What are ways that a producer can best like help or serve the accounting department so that they're set up for success?
I love this question. Here is a big, frequent bugaboo and pain point. They're spending money on this credit card, their cachet card, their P card, and they're not turning in receipts. They're not coding them in the systems that we have. Because in our system, there's a live feed of all the card transactions, and it's
Hmm.
connected with QuickBooks that has all the accounts in there. So they just have to write, this is for, because if we see a bunch of Amazon transactions just coming through the bank, we have no idea what those are for. Oh, this is for the expendables. This is for, we bought a camera or whatever, you know, this is for granola bars. But uh, so it's really important that the card holders, whoever they are, it's typically the producers or product managers or coordinators or whoever they are, turn in those receipts and code them so that
Hmm.
those costs can get in the cost reports. And it's important that the accountant provide an easy interface for them to do that with an app or however it works. Because everything's online these days, so they're uploading receipts and coding them online.
Yep.
That's how the producers can help is just stay up to date on the credit cards. That's really the biggest thing I would say. And then sort of think ahead. That helps us to be more effective at our job too, like not make everything an emergency. We've seen them, oh, we need this person needs to be paid immediately. Well, didn't you know about that 2 weeks ago that you were going to shoot at that location? Okay.
Hmm.
So, as just a courtesy and help us do our jobs better so that everybody's not stressing like, oh, they won't let us shoot until they get this fee and they're standing there on the location. You know, that's not okay. So they can help us by just giving us as much lead time as you can for these expenses that come up.
I guess one thing I'd be curious about, because you mentioned how nowadays, the accounting has very much gone to all kind of remote, more online, as opposed to necessarily like, oh, they're physically present in the production office. Um, I'm just curious, like what are some of the challenges maybe when your accounting team is remote that maybe you face, or what are some of the differences in maybe how you need to run as a producer
That's a great
your
question.
set?
In people's head, they're used to having somebody in a trailer on the production lot, right? And that
Hmm.
they can go in and get what they think they need from the accountant. But there's really nothing that I don't believe there are any challenges, and I think that more and more it's a luxury to have a physical accountant on the set, and it's going to be more expensive too, you know,
Hmm.
because if somebody's in a trailer on a lot, a production set, people are going to be hounding that person 24/7, and it's going to take more people to get the job done because they think that they're so accessible. So I actually think a lot of people are still, it's hard for them to let go of having
Hmm.
somebody physically there. But my response to them is always, well, do you want to touch flesh or do you want it done right? Like what do you need? So it's in my book, there's I mean, I was remote way before COVID. I started my business almost 8 years ago, and we've been 100% remote, and it just works.
Hmm.
I, in fact, never have been on a movie set. When, as a teenager, that's where I thought I'd be living my life. But having known production accountants, it's even if you're at some fabulous location, it's gruelingly long hours, often stressful. Maybe dealing with egos, I don't know. So, you might have time to tour the Riviera, the French Riviera, maybe not. So God's really good, and He's given me a great gig working on all these interesting projects from my dining room table, and same with my team too. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't really see any challenges. I mean, there are differences for sure,
Hmm.
but I don't see any challenges in doing it fully remote. And I frankly don't really understand when I see sometimes maybe postings for accountants that must be fully in office or on set. Like, okay, that's what you want.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So then another question I had for you, since you kind of got your start in more the documentary and non-scripted side, and now you're getting more into the scripted side, are there differences when it comes to accounting in scripted versus non-scripted
You
that
are
people
really
should be
good at
aware
asking
of?
questions. And I think that the biggest difference are the unions and the size of the budgets. Because once you get the unions involved, especially, I mean, this really only relates to payroll, but there's different rules that your payroll person needs to know and be aware of. Typically, the payroll company will handle the payments to the unions or the different guilds, you know, that you're because once something is scripted, there's talent and different unions that have to be adhered to those rules. That's really the
Hmm.
biggest difference. Because if it's a documentary, there's really no actors or actresses, right?
Right.
I would say that's the largest difference. So from an accounting perspective, it mostly falls on the payroll side, and the budgets tend to be larger and scripted for those very reasons, because it's talent, a lot of it is above the line, the
Yes.
expenses.
Yeah. I was running a budget for a scripted thing the other day. And it's just like, yeah, this is a lot of money
Yeah,
compared
exactly.
to some of the
Exactly.
not as scripted things that I've done. So then we talked about kind of when the accounting department come should come on a project, but how long does the accounting department kind of stick around on a project?
We
In
usually stick around till the bitter end. Sometimes on a larger feature, when it goes into post, the activity slows down a lot. So we might have some kind of tiered pricing arrangement, like it drops to this during the post, because really during shooting is really the heavy lifting of a production. But we're generally there till the end, till it's delivered, till it's wrapped, till it's finished. Some
okay.
of our clients are we're working, I mean, our client is not the specific job, it's the actual company. So we just
Hmm.
keep rolling over and doing whatever they have going on.
Right. I'm just curious with your company, do you guys ever help at all with like maybe the accounting side of like the marketing and distribution for projects, or are you guys strictly just like production, post-production, and all
You
that?
know, we're starting to get more production adjacent clients, I call them.
Okay.
And one of them is a distribution company. So we are doing that distribution accounting, and we are happy to get involved in whatever stage or part of the project a person is in.
Hmm. Looking back at the producer, have you noticed, are there, if there's like common misconceptions or maybe misunderstandings that you find producers have about the accounting department?
Oh, well, I mean, it's sort of an indirect answer to your question, but I think if any misconception, and it might be overconfidence on the part of the producer, like, oh, I can just do this myself. You know,
Hmm.
I think that that would be my answer, and the most common things we see. And then we come in and it's like, oh my goodness, we just have to do some cleanup. So it's doesn't really benefit anyone,
Yes.
who we're talking about earlier.
Hmm. That makes sense. And I don't think it's just the producer. I think it's something that many different positions in our industry can always think they can handle way more than they
Yeah,
actually can, and then they get doing it, and it's like,
they're buried.
no.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I wanted to look a little bit at the aspect of like going over budget. Because that's no always a fun time when that happens on a project. And just like from the accounting perspective, what are you, when something starts going over budget, like what are you guys doing and how are you able to help the producer figure out how to best navigate that situation?
Okay. Well, the most important thing we do is reporting, right? So that he can know, he or she can know
Hmm.
that they're over budget. And typically we're not involved in the meetings about where to cut costs because they're largely creative decisions. I mean, if the cost reporting is done right, they can see at a glance, oh, we're over on this line, but we have extra money, we're under on this line. So, so it can, I mean, we can sit in those meetings and help them suggest things. We typically don't though, because first of all, our clients are, well, for the most part, not going over budget. And secondarily, like I said, those are largely creative decisions that the
Hmm.
accountants would be involved in. So the way that we could support them if they ever wanted it was just to sit in that meeting with them and see where costs can be cut, you know? And then, I mean, on the front side of, you didn't ask this question either, but I'm going to answer it, that we want to be proactive about how to not go over budget, and lo-
Right.
it's like building enough contingency in the budget. It's making sure that your cost controls are in place. We keep all of the bank and credit cards accounts reconciled on a regular basis because you don't want any surprises, right? If your bank account and your credit card accounts are and your entire balance sheet is reconciled regularly, you can
Hmm.
be confident that the expense numbers are accurate. So that's what the accountant contributes just to make sure that those things are done. And for it's human nature to overestimate revenue and underestimate expenses. So that's why I always go back to building in a healthy contingency in your budget. And for filmmakers in particularly, they have to budget for P&A. Otherwise, if they get done with production at the end of the day, they got this gorgeous film in the can, but there's no money to market it. It's just going to sit in the can and nobody's ever going to see it.
Hmm.
So part of the budgeting process is to make sure that that's built in too. And I also wanted to also mention when we're talking about costs, on the front side, you want to make sure to have enough built in that are profit lines. We call them soft costs, maybe executive producer fees or some kind of overhead fees or things, maybe equipment rental that you own or something like that, because you want to make sure that there's enough built in there so that it will be profitable, even, well, just in a vacuum from the funding of the film. Like, let's say it's $1 million project and you get $1 million in, you want to make sure that it's profitable.
Hmm.
That million in and million out, part of that million should come back to the owner of whoever it is, the producer, the executive.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. For people who have maybe been listening to this and they're like, "Oh, this kind of sounds fun," or "This might be my type of thing," like, what advice would you give to them about getting started in the accounting
That's a
world?
great question. There are production accountant groups on Facebook and LinkedIn, I believe, but I know Facebook for a fact. I would join one of those groups, even if you're just starting out, because these are the types of questions that can be asked on there. They're very welcoming communities, and they're regional. Like there's a production accountants Los Angeles group, a production accountants New York group, and there are courses you can take. It's not at film school, but typically who offers them are these payroll companies. They have lots
Okay.
of resources on their websites for all kinds of stuff for production accounting about how to do it. And it's just a Google search away, but I even know a couple of people I'm drawing a blank on on their names, but they offer like private courses for groups, like it's their online
Hmm.
where they teach all these things. It's those the way that all those people teach them is a little different than the way we do it at our firm, but it gets the job done, you know. Or come to me. I'm happy to mentor anybody. I mean, within reason, like
Right.
specific questions, they can reach out to me at our website, prodcoaccountants.com, or reach out to me. My name is Margot Ransom, and it's M like Mary, ransom like kidnapping money at prodcoaccountants.com. And I'm here to serve. I'm here to serve. If people want to ask me quick questions or I can steer them in the direction of something. I mean, if you have I've seen this in some of these accounting groups that they might be a CPA that wants to get into film accounting and they're trying to figure out how to break into.
Hmm.
That's really the best place to start is just get yourself in a community of people because it's all about relationships. They usually are starting at the bottom on those clerk jobs that I told you about,
Yeah.
learning the ropes and working their way up.
Hmm. Definitely. Jumping even a little farther back, I guess you could say than that. If there's like filmmakers out there who maybe they're still in high school or college, they're nowhere near being in the position of needing or being able to afford a production accountant. What are some things they can be doing to stay better organized and kind of still have an aspect of accounting to their projects?
In your example, if somebody's in high school or even college dreaming of a career, I mean, I think just being a generally organized person will help you no matter what industry you go into.
Hmm.
So I don't, it's way premature to start saying, well, you set up your QuickBooks now. There's because it's not applicable to somebody
Right.
in that position. But I think just staying organized will be good training for that in general. And I also just want to say that I think this crosses industries too, is that if you can find somebody to help hold you accountable to reach that dream, I'd like to encourage anybody listening to this that dreams about making movies to go for it because life is short and it's if you have something in you that wants to get out, maybe get an accountability buddy and just have 5 minute daily or 10 minute weekly check-ins, like, and tell them you're going to do something, and then that person holds you accountable.
Hmm.
That would be my advice on a more general level.
Yeah, that's always a struggle for creatives is being organized. That's
Right. I know. We see it all the time. They're brilliant creatively, but organized, not so much. We see it all the time. So, you can't make somebody be what they're not going to be. So I don't really have any advice for somebody that's not even
hmm.
anywhere near it other than just be organized. It will pay off in the long run. It will be better because then when you are in a position to bring an accountant on, you can know where you're at.
Hmm.
There's less to clean up,
Yes, that is for sure.
less expensive for them.
Definitely. Couple kind of closing questions, I guess. First, I wanted to look a little bit at the whole aspect of like the tax incentives and all that, because I know that's always a big thing on producers' minds when they're trying to figure out where to film a movie and all that. So like how do you and your team kind of help the producer with dealing with those tax incentives and credits and all that?
Right. Well, on the front end, we help and we by informing them of which states have the best ones. We've been sending a lot of business lately to Kentucky,
Hmm.
and I'm going to do a little plug here now for one of our clients. It's Wrigley Media Group, and they are based in Lexington. Excuse me. And if you work with them, what they will do is because Kentucky has a 30 to 35% cash rebate. A lot of states are tax credits, which means if you have $1 million project and you get a 20% tax incentive, then you get a certificate that says, oh, you have a $200,000 coupon for paying your taxes with. But most people in this industry don't have that large of a tax liability. So these tax credits are bought and sold on the open market for 95 cents on the dollar. I don't know exactly what it is,
Hmm.
to large banks and corporations that do have bigger tax liabilities. So, as you might imagine, there's a lot of red tape with the tax credits. So we try to steer people away from those and go to states that have direct rebates. Like with that same example, you if you have a $2 million project with a 20% rebate, you get a check at the end for 200,000. But Kentucky has a 30 to 35% direct rebate, which is very attractive. And they will also incentivize out-of-state crew if you bring them in,
Oh,
which not
nice.
to. Yeah. What I was starting to say about Wrigley Media Group, though, is if you partner with them for your production, they will advance whatever the expected return is. For example, again, on that $1 million project, say you're expecting a 30% return, they will advance that money to the production so that the producer only needs to come to the table with 70% of his budget. And then they recoup that money out of the rebate from the state, and they handle all the applications, the red tape, and everything. So to me, that's a no-brainer. We've worked on incentives in other states, and we will work with whatever the producer is set on. But if they're going to ask us our opinion, we're going to say, you should look at Kentucky, you know. So there's that. That's how we help them in the beginning. And then during, we help them by making sure the costs are segregated, you know, what's eligible, what's not eligible, what's eligible
Hmm.
for this premium. If it's in this county, you know, you get an extra bump on the rebate, whatever it is. And then we help them to what sometimes a lesser degree, sometimes a greater degree with the submission of the package. Most of the time that's done by somebody else on the production team at the end of
Okay.
production, but we certainly can help them with that too.
And with that, like, do you guys help track, I guess you could call it, to see like if the production's on target for getting what they thought they were going to get back or
Yes,
not?
definitely. We can tell them in the middle of production or any point in there how they are tracking because we're tagging things eligible, like using that Kentucky example. Not eligible, not qualified. Here's qualified at 30. Here's qualified at 30%. Here's what you've spent so far. You know, you're in the middle of production, so you're about halfway. And so they can, yes, we help them know where they're at any given time during the production. Yes.
Nice. Oh, that's super nice. I guess my final kind of question for you is just I'd be curious to hear if what's like one thing you know now, having been doing the accounting for a while, that like you wish you would have known when you were first getting started doing this.
Well, when I was first getting started doing this, I was working for production companies. And I think it would have been nice to, well, this is way before you could do everything online. So that doesn't, what I was going to say is that if I'd have known all those years ago that I could do it for more than one company at a time, I probably would have figured out a way to do
Hmm.
it. But it just never occurred to me until that last job I was working at was closing its doors and I didn't want to look for another job. Um, that's it for me personally. And because it's wonderful meeting all these interesting creatives and no day is the same as the other day. And
Hmm.
it's a blast. So, but it was fun working at the production companies too. I don't really know. I think it unfolded in God's perfect plan. I don't really have anything like that that I wish I knew back then. You
Okay,
know, you're learning every day, hopefully, and hopefully getting smarter every day.
that's for sure. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this episode of the show. So thank you once again, Margot, for coming on to talk to us today.
It's been my pleasure, honestly, and good luck to you. If anybody wants to reach out for questions, please. I'm all over LinkedIn, and it's Margot with a T, Margot, Ransom. And
All right.
you and your projects, Micah.
Yeah, hopefully one day we'll get to work together on something. With that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Producer Podcast. Come back next week for another can't miss episode of the Producer Podcast. Until then, make sure to check out our new website, theproducerpodcast.com, and pick up your copy of The Producer's Life, the new book based on the show. I'm your host, Micah Versemann, and thanks for listening.